Damian Coory, how are you doing? I'm so glad to see you after all this time.
Yeah, it's great to see you too, mate. And yeah, I'm okay. I mean, it was a bit of a knock. I think everybody expected maybe that we might lose, but it was a bit more than we expected, really, I think, at the end of the day.
Do you think there's hope for Australia?
Yeah, I mean, I'm eternally optimistic, and I think there's always hope. But we are going to have to step up and fight in the metaphorical sense, not physically, of course, but definitely attitudinally, and we're going to have to show some courage and bravery, and that's probably going to have to come from the young fellas. It is time to really start to change the narrative and own the narrative and take the narrative back. And unfortunately, we just at this point don't have a political party in Australia that's got its act together that wants to do that. And given, I mean, we're recording this just a couple of hours after the election of Sussan Ley, or Lee, I'm not sure how to say it, to the leadership of the Liberal Party. So that ain't going to change anytime soon. And David Littleproud, the day before our recording, got elected to the leadership of the National Party over Matt Canavan. So again, the Liberal Party has decided that the problem is that it's not left-wing enough, it's not centrist enough, it's not buying into the neo-Marxist identity politics enough, and as a result, it's going in that direction, which will support their inner city teal seats, but it's going to pretty much wreck everything else. So what that does do, however, is open up an opportunity for a reform-style Conservative Party to move in, and I can't see that not happening. It's like a vacuum, nature abhors a vacuum. So I think we're going to see that happen in the next year or two.
Yeah, I think so. I was impressed with how One Nation did. There's certainly some good personalities out there that have some good knowledge. One thing that kind of upsets me a little is that they seem to be prone to kind of arguing with each other.
Internally in One Nation, or between
between, say, One Nation, Roberts and Rennick had a bit of a spat between a vote that One Nation abstained from. I think the more there's a unified front, it almost doesn't matter that they're different parties, but if they're fighting with each other, then that's a put off, I think, for voters to align with them.
Yeah, look, I think. I might be wrong on the numbers, but I think Rennick's People First got around 1.5% to 2% of the primary vote, which is pretty good for a first run. And Palmer got 1.9 this time, I think, and One Nation got up around 6.3, 6.4. My numbers might be a little off, but roughly that was the sort of finishing position. Libertarians, unfortunately, we're down in the sort of 0.5 area. I don't think they've got a value proposition that's appealing to Australians, or that Australians yet understand, and I don't say that with any ill will. I'm very fond of a lot of the people in that party, and I think there's a lot of hope there as well, especially for picking up the more socially liberal economic conservatives. The Libertarian parties are good for that. The Laboritarians, I suppose they would call them. Yeah, look, I think collectively those minor parties have done pretty well. The problem, I think, keeps coming back to it's really hard to run a political party. It's really hard to comply with all of the compliance requirements, just the administrative requirements of running a party. It's very hard to kind of get everybody on the same page, to have the structures of a constitution and the voting processes, and this is where the major parties have kind of got the game stitched up, and Liberal Party's been at it since it was formed, right? So it's got all those decades of institutional know-how around pulling together that organisational structure you need, and having the discipline, the focus, and all that sort of thing. And so it's also made deliberately difficult on purpose, of course, for minor parties. I mean, the major parties have colluded on rules and regulations and things designed to attack the minor parties, like having a limit of 4% of the vote that you have to get before you get any money from the AEC. I mean, it's crazy, I guess, in a sense that we pay parties for their votes anyway, but in this country, I think it's about $3 or $4 you get per vote, but you only get it if you score more than 4% of the primary vote, right? So again, biases the major parties. There's a lot of other rules like that crazy naming legislation they brought in that forced the Liberal Democrats to change their name to the Libertarians. You're not allowed to use the word Liberal or the word Democrat or the word Labor in your party name anymore. If you know, any kind of generic political term is banned. And a lot of other rules and regulations that really are designed to purely just sustain that two-party system. We also have preferential voting, which is two sides to this debate, and I'm not sure which is totally right. There's the side that says, well, preferential voting actually enables a minor party to emerge because you can have a splinter Liberal Party or a splinter Labor Party that without damaging the core party. And the example that's often used for that argument is the US presidential system where, if somebody ran against Trump as a Republican, that would just split the Republican vote and ensure that the Democrats would win. So you can't do that. Whereas in Australia, you could do that and the Republicans would still win, whoever got the most votes out of the two Republicans. And so I think in some ways preferential voting is good for minor splinter groups. The argument against it, of course, is that it's much easier to get that first past. If you do get a bit of momentum, it is easier to get the first past the post vote, as we saw with Nigel Farage in the UK with the council elections on the same weekend as our election, where he just cleaned up. And mainly, if that had been the Australian environment with preferential voting, it probably wouldn't have. So two sides of that argument. Very hard to know. It depends on the circumstances which is better. I think you've just got to play the game that's out there. And do your very best, within that. But anyway, just went off there a bit. But
just
the minor
1 sec.
parties.
I was going to ask about preferential voting a bit later, but let's do it now. I point people to what happened to Adam Bandt as a apologetic why you should keep preferential voting. Preferential voting in his seat in Melbourne meant that more people didn't want him to lead than did when you take note of the preferences. Whereas he got more of the primary, the votes were telling me that more people didn't want him in than did. And so you're actually supporting the people's opinion more accurately than first past the post. The other thing is, if we didn't have 100% compulsory voting, that preferential system would have a big problem. So those two things, in my view, lock in together. Without one, the other doesn't make any sense.
Yes, that's a really good insight. Actually, I think you're absolutely right there. Yeah, I think the two need to be together. Yeah, it seems to make sense. I think also what you're saying about Adam Bandt's seat is absolutely right. That there is a kind of a moral or ethical case that this is actually what the people prefer, right? More people would rather Adam Bandt was not there, and therefore, that's expressed through the preferential voting, and it wouldn't be expressed otherwise. And this is equivalent to in exactly the opposite political situation, which is we saw in the Brisbane seat of Ryan, which was one of the other four. There are four Green seats in Australia: Adam Bandt's seat in Melbourne, and then the three Brisbane inner city Green seats, which were Griffith, Ryan, and Brisbane. And so the reason that there were three Green inner city Brisbane seats was that we didn't have Teals at the last election. There were no Teals running. I don't know why they ignored Brisbane, but they did. And so the Greens sort of filled that Teal gap. And there was a very tealy candidate running in this leafy inner city, inner suburban electorate of Ryan that has Queensland University right smack in the middle of it. So think sort of Ivanhoe, Heidelberg, that kind of vibe of a suburb, leafy green, what would be the Lane Cove, in Sydney, that sort of thing. So
upper middle class.
Yeah, upper middle class, wealthy Greens, NIMBY Greens, granny Greens, virtue signalling Greens, that mindset of the boomer Green, right, as well as all the young university kids. And so Ryan was held by this lady, Elizabeth Watson-Brown. She beat the incumbent Liberal at the 2022 election. And there was a very tight three-horse race, so to speak, in this seat as well. But it went the other way. So we had a situation where Maggie Forrest, the Liberal candidate, Liberal National Party in Queensland candidate, who herself is not on the right of the Liberal Party, and she's a centrist to left, I'd say, on the Liberal Party spectrum. So a good inner city candidate for the Liberal Party, the Liberal National Party, the right sort of person for that electorate. She wound up getting about 30,000 votes. Elizabeth Watson-Brown, the incumbent Green, got about 20, my numbers again are probably right off here, but it was roughly 25, and Labor got roughly 25, right? So the reality is that as much as I would have liked to have seen Maggie Forrest win, the reality is that more people didn't want Maggie Forrest to be the member than did want Maggie Forrest to be the member, because 50,000 of them, I mean, there were minor party votes for Maggie of about 8 or 9,000, right? Every other minor party was Conservative, and she got most of that. But the reality is that it comes down to the fact that the majority of people were voting Labor or Green. And I think Elizabeth Watson-Brown pipped the Labor candidate by about 500 votes in the end. It was like less than 500, might have even been 400 and something. It was like so tight that it took days before it was called. And but Elizabeth Watson-Brown ended up winning. I would have preferred to see the Labor candidate get up than the Green, but unfortunately that's the way it flipped. And you could say, well, that's unfair. Maggie got 30-something thousand of the votes. She should be the winner. Or you could say, look, it's unfair that the Liberals and the Labor were so close. Or if those preferences hadn't stopped with Maggie, because she was in the final two, some of those Conservative preferences would have actually flowed to the Labor candidate. And that's where it gets a bit messy. And then therefore, she would have got up, right? And that probably would have reflected the will of the people more. I mean, I guess there is no perfect system, but you can't really look at that and say, well, that's not expressing the will of the people. It sort of is. I mean, a left-wing candidate got up because more people voted left-wing, and that's probably, as it should be if we're going to be balanced about it.
I mean, these elections by nature are similar to investing in the market. I mean, there's a lot of people that say they know what they're doing and they can read the market and all those other things like the pollsters. But at the end of the day, you've got millions of individuals making choices, and they all have their own view of things. And it's the election system, the electoral system that we have, I think, is the absolute best, the pinnacle, following the UK and the US system. And the people that gave it to us, they weren't fools. I mean, when we don't like an outcome, sometimes we're prone to want to blame it on something. And I'm noticing a lot of the online keyboard warriors from the right, or the Liberal supporters, or the One Nation supporters. They're coming down. They're trying to beat up on preferential voting. They're trying to beat up on compulsory voting. They want to deport every single human being that didn't originate in this country. But then who did?
Yeah, I don't like those people.
You know what I mean? Anyway, we're going
I believe in much more control over immigration, but I don't like the people who want to deport everybody that wasn't born in this country.
So was I.
You can be born. You can be a new citizen and be much more Australian than
absolutely
somebody who goes back to the First Fleet.
Absolutely,
in my view. Anyway, I think. Yeah, look, I think it's to be expected that you're going to have these sort of, we didn't win, so why? And then it's going to be all about the campaign, or it's going to be all about this or that, or the rules. The rules have favoured the Conservative side of politics as much as they favoured, so I don't think, and we do have one of the best systems in the world. Just on preferential voting too, Josh, the preferential voting has another name, and the name is instantaneous runoff. And so it derives from the French system of a runoff election. I don't know if it's a French system. It's a system the French use. They do it over weekends. So, basically you have one election and then you work out who the top two are there, and then, or top three, and then you whittle it down over successive elections until you get down to the last two, and then everybody gets to vote on the last two. Instantaneous runoff is designed to make that more efficient, that process, by making everybody put their preferences immediately on the one day, and then we just allocate according to that. The problem with that, though, is that you don't get that week in between for campaign, and people might change their mind in the week in between, and, so instantaneous runoff is probably not as good as slow runoff. It is more efficient and cheap.
So it sounds like the French system is kind of like the finals in footy.
Right. Yeah. Well, you're the AFL. Yeah. So I'm not sure what the NRL does now, but yeah, the AFL definitely. So yes, and I think, and you get a chance to kind of decide, well, okay, out of those two teams, I'm going to barrack for this one now. I think one of the other problems we have is that we allocate a full vote. And I know this would be mathematically difficult and probably require us to go to some digital format for voting, which I'm not sure I'd want to do. But I think the ideal system might be if your second preference was weighted as 0.75, and the third preference was weighted at 0.5, and the fourth preference was weighted at 0.25 of a vote. And so when we're allocating those preferences, it's not like an extra one.
Okay,
you need second preference.
You need 2 second preferences to make 1 first preference, something like that.
Yeah, roughly. Work out some system of numbering and rating and weighting, rather weighting those second and third preferences would make things fairer, I think. But then you're ending up with this super complicated system that it'll be like the Senate. Nobody understands exactly how the Senate works. Educating. I think you got to have a vote. One of the cases for first past the post that's often put, and one of the reasons why the UK has resisted moving to a preferential system, I think, is because they believe in the principle that you've got to have an electoral system that the public can understand, that the public can grasp really simply. Otherwise, it lacks transparency and believability, and you get a lot of people going, "Oh, this is too smoky and mirrory, and I don't know, I don't understand it. Therefore, it's it's rigged." Which is a valid criticism. I mean, if it's not clear to people how their leaders are being elected, and they don't believe the system is fair, and they don't understand the system, and they can't, then that's gonna pose problems.
So, Damian, I know that the freedom movement, the lay people that are associated with the freedom movement that spurred or really gained prominence out of the lockdowns and the pandemic stuff, they seem to say many words that relate to liberal ideas of good governance and freedom of speech and justice, until you start disagreeing with them or calling them out on something. Then all of a sudden you get attacked, you get banned, you get called names, you get accused that you're not intelligent. Do you think that the people fighting for freedom are really helping in that sense? The online warriors, I don't know what you would call them, but they're basically lay people who are then making a platform of freedom on social media. Are they really helping, or are they really helping the left's narrative that all right-wing are interested in is fascism?
Great question. We need to watch our behavior on the right, for sure. We need to ensure that we're not mirroring the very thing that we criticize, which is a lack of nuance, a lack of complexity in our discussions and our thinking. And I realize social media doesn't lend itself to that. Certain aspects of social media, or generally media, don't. The soundbite was the television news soundbite was the nemesis of my journalistic career. Caused me to go into talk radio more and wanting to have more conversations that were longer. But then you don't get the audience. I mean, it's a paradox. So it's really problematic. But we have to resist that temptation for the hit, the quick hit. Which means you've got to strike that balance constantly. And look, very few issues are black and white, and just the aggressive condemning of somebody because they don't hold your view exactly, that's just garbage, and it's got to stop. It's just childish as anything on the left. And if you're still doing that and you're over 40 and you're a conservative, well, you might as well be that university student, that's intolerant and not listening. So doesn't mean you shouldn't have strong views and put your views, and that's fine. I do that. But I also I'm open to sensible criticism and arguing ideas and issues, and so there are certain things that you got to avoid, and I don't avoid them all the time. I'm a sinner, that's for sure, in that respect. But first thing you got to avoid is any sort of ad hominem, and ad hominem just means attacking the person, not the argument, right? We really have to get away from that, because if we don't, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. Now, there are people you can't debate with, that you're not going to get anywhere with, and you might say, look, I try to not say you're a moron, but I will say that's a moronic perspective, right? Or that's a moronic view. Or that's a stupid view, or that's an ill-informed view, or that's probably be a less sinful thing to say. So we have to try to move towards that. Always carry that high moral ground.
The only way I know how to sort of push in and try and help that is by recognizing that there are knowledgeable people who are trying to fight for our freedom, who know what freedom is, who know what justice means from a classical liberal point of view. And we should reach out and connect with those people and let them inform us. There are other people who are, I don't want to say grifters, although some of them may be. There are other people who are more angry about something, and then they learn a language that then attracts people to them to get a following. And then they start the tyranny of the dollar. I need some funding so that I don't have to go back to my other job. And I just think the economics of Facebook tend towards being a little bit manipulative, and that doesn't bode well for trying to communicate a moral liberal worldview.
No, no, it doesn't. And I guess it was the same. It's ever been thus with media, and yellow media, and the whole idea that we're back in the 1900s. They used to talk in the early 1900s. They talked about the yellow media. I think because it was the tabloid paper was yellow, and they'd print it on this cheap paper. But it was always the tacky headline, the clickbait headline. Well, they wouldn't have called it clickbait in 1920s. And I think the problem of the populism and playing to mob rule is always going to be there. And so it's a matter of putting your case more strongly. And, I mean, the mob will always be, it'll be free Barabbas. It's kind of, we're stuck with that. But ultimately, the other guy wins in the end, sort of thing. We've just got to keep going. And I firmly believe that television news, is dying the death it ought to die, because we were just doing sound bites and we're still just doing sound bites, and the only political coverage you get on television news is the, drama of the personalities of the day. It's like reality television, not the issues being discussed properly. The ABC used to fill that void. Like, it took its responsibility very seriously in the 20th century. And I went through university and journalism school in the 20th century. It was Marxist, but it wasn't quite as Marxist as it is today. Although it was definitely Marxist on many levels. But there was this view that the ABC, and within the ABC when I worked there were a lot of conservatives, but the Triple J kids grew up and took over the place, as I always say. And so now it's just the Triple J kids running the joint. The Triple J kids of my generation, the 80s and 90s, are now the Metro radio presenters and the management of the ABC, television and radio. And so, you've got the lunatics running the asylum, so to speak, and it's lost. And that role it had of playing we're going to not rate with this interview. We're going to have Bob Hawke sit down with, this particular presenter for an hour and discuss something really boring on economics. And, we're going to have a debate with a few economists from all sides. And, it may not rate that well, but boy, it rates better than ABC radio rates today.
Yeah.
So they might want to reflect on that.
If the arbiters of the debate, the moderators, can stay out of arguing against one person so that you don't get this gang up thing where the lefty and the moderator then attack the conservative dude, yeah, that'd be great. But it's hard when the game is rigged at so many levels.
There's no conservative dude on the panel. I mean, their idea of a diverse panel is from far left to center left. And, I mean, they might have a liberal on but there's never a liberal from the conservative side. They're not. So what's great? I mean, the great news about the ABC is it's irrelevant. It's becoming more and more irrelevant. It's such an echo chamber now of inner city elites. Nobody's listening to it other than other inner city elites. So it'll win the teal seats and that'll go on forever, and they'll control the discourse, as I said earlier. But it's kind of like, if it doesn't really matter if we learn to stop listening to it as a conservative side of politics and just start listening to our electorate. So there's that. The downside, I suppose, the negative is we're still paying for it.
Well, that's why I think we should sell it.
Totally. One great idea would be to sell it to the people who work there.
Yeah, exactly.
Give them all shares in it.
It's like,
say,
here
you go. You can't have the real estate, by the way. You've got to pay rent to the government for the real estate. You're going to have to buy that back or rent it back. But you can have the viewership. You can have the equipment.
You can have all the shows and ideas.
You can have all that. Here you go. Here's a great head start. Everybody, you work out how you want to do the shareholdings among the staff. Have a great time.
Yeah. See you later.
Yeah. See you later. You're not getting any more government funding. You're not getting any more of the taxpayers' money that's taken from them under threat of jail.
One thing, that's not going to happen under Labor. So
no, we won't see that for the next 3 years. That's for sure. Why would you shut down your own
propaganda
$1 billion public funded propaganda machine?
You're
not going to do that.
Well, I think that sort of brings up another point: is that academics need to really get involved a lot more in educating the people. For instance, and I was going to get to this later too, but let's do it now. The university system and the high school and primary school system is set up, according to ACARA, to make better people for a better world. And when you look at the cross-curriculum priorities in the Australian National Curriculum, it's the Aboriginal histories and languages, culture and histories, the Asian region with China as primary, or in the Asian region, and the Sustainable Development, which is the UN global sort of way of sort of transforming the world. So you've really
Yeah.
got a school and education system that, if you go through, creates a natural sort of affinity to people if they want to get into politics. So they're politicized through that process. And if they want to get into politics, there's an easy sort of flow right into the Liberal Party, right into the Greens, right into the Teals. Whereas the Liberals, they don't have a replacement rate. They have a lower replacement rate because they don't have something generating Liberals, people with the liberal idea of politics, to come in and fill the outgoing politicians. I mean, back in the 80s and 90s, you had Tony Abbott, Peter Costello. You had all these personalities, even in the Labor Party too. You had all these personalities that people knew about and who were, somewhat brilliant in their own right. Whereas now we've got these I've never heard of Sussan Ley. You know what I mean? Canavan, I heard about him, but these people, we don't know them.
There's some really good talent getting through, and on the right side of politics, I'd say Canavan, Antic. These are smart young men with vision and intellect and highly verbal and articulate people. And they are the future of conservative politics, whether that's in the Liberal and National Party or it's outside the Liberal and National Party. I hope we don't see the end of the Canavans and Antics. I hope they are the new breed. But the bigger problem is that we've turned politics in Australia into a career. And we have so politics then becomes an extension of the bureaucracy of government. And so those who will continue, putting aside corruption, which I'll get to in a minute, but just ordinary day-to-day, life, uncorruption, not corrupt, just people who want to get a career going, therefore are only going to be promoted if the sort of people who support the organizational structure and their career path within that structure, and the structure and the organization serves them. They're never going to reduce the scale or size of government. They're going to always want to feed the size of government. So on our side of politics, where we're supposed to believe in actively reducing the size of government, you're going to get that pushback and that fear locking in, because it diminishes my potential career path. So I don't want to upset the bureaucracy or the senior bureaucrats, because that could affect my career as a politician. So the first thing that I think we've got to do as a priority is take the careerism out of our politics. So politics, I always talk about the honourable. That honorific, that title, the honourable, came because I think the original Westminster system participants in the chambers were not paid. So it was an honourable thing. It was an honourable service. Tended to attract people who had already had a career and were established in their fields,
and that's
who
also
could bring
why
something.
That's also why they call them ministers. They're not power brokers. They're ministers, which is the idea from the church of a minister in the church serves the people. A minister in the parliament is supposed to be serving the people.
Right. So it's not that, you shouldn't be acting like an extension of the Director General of the department. You should be overseeing the Director General of the department. You should be driving the ideological agenda and the view that you were elected to drive, and you ought to be following the will of the people and the members of the party in doing that. In order to get people who are doing that, I think we have to have the 12-year limit. I think we have to have, so that would be 4 terms as an MP in the lower house, or 2 terms in the Senate, with 6-year terms in the Senate. So in states, we have 4-year terms. So that would be 3 terms in the state. I think that's enough. I think 12 years is enough. And I would prefer candidates. Well, firstly, the younger candidates would be more inclined then to go get a real job first and then come into politics later. So we'd stop this sort of, I was in the Young Liberals at uni. I now had a job working for Minister X for the last 10 years in their office, or some small parliamentary office. Oh, look, I'm going to sit for pre-selection for this seat. Oh, look, I've got the pre-selection, so I'm now going to, there's too much of that. And on the Labor side, of course, that goes through the unions and everything, so it's just as bad, if not worse. So I think we just need to say, look, sorry, not a career. You need to go actually do something meaningful, contribute to society. Then you might be able to be a politician. Or if you do want to start young, well, know that it's going to end in 12 years. So you better have a backup plan. You'd be working on another career. And maybe those sort of politicians would disappear a bit and we wouldn't have so many of them. So I think it's got to be a case of, we're asking people to serve, and then we'll have more men of integrity, women of character, women of true values aligned with the party, not career goals, trying to navigate through some sort of political career, which causes everybody to betray the values of their party or betray their service to the people as ministers or as members of the parliament. So I think that's really important. I think that careerist problem is probably our biggest. The second thing is this: anybody who thinks politics is a good career is a loser. I'm sorry, it's the worst possible thing you could do, right? You'd have to be mad to think that this is a good job or a good path. It's awful. It's hard. It's difficult. You've got to go and reapply for your job every 3 years. You've got to hit the streets and walk around. Maybe you'll get a safe seat, but most politicians, there's no safe seats anymore in a lot of situations. So it's a slog, and it's an endless mental kind of juggling of issues, because you're dealing with the actual tangible grassroots issues. And you've got to bring ideology and values, and then to convince people. It's constant convincing and negotiating and compromising and then trying to sell that position that you've it's like, I think of it as something I would do as a service, but God, a career, no thank you. So anyone who thinks this is a career has got rocks in their heads to start with, which means, okay, we've just ticked that they've got rocks in their heads box, and we don't want that. We don't want people with rocks in their heads, or it's people who can't get a job anywhere else that pays 200 grand a year. I don't want that. I want the people who are earning 500 grand a year to be in my parliament. Thanks very much. I want the people who've achieved in small business, the people who've achieved in the corporate world and gotten the hard knocks of the corporate world, that have had to really, haven't just floated along. It should be something. It should be something that's a service, and it should be seen as a service. So I think they're the real problem. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with the problem of there isn't any. Have you noticed how they had to go looking for someone to lead the Liberal Party? I mean, there just wasn't an obvious talent there, right? And that shouldn't be the case. There should be 2 or 3 people that are just like, well, they're the obvious leaders. They're the A-grade people, as my friend Graham Haycroft would say. They're the A-graders, and they're the ones we all agree should be our leaders. Well, the A-graders aren't playing the game. They're not even on the field. They're out doing business and doing other, because no one wants to play this game, because it doesn't carry that honourableness anymore, and therefore it doesn't carry status. It doesn't carry respect in the community. That it used to carry. And this is a sad thing. This probably speaks a lot to hierarchy, and you'd probably be able to speak this better than I would, Josh, in terms of what that means from a Marxist sort of thinking perspective. But the destruction of the hierarchy, the destruction of any sense of respect for earned merit, honourable service of a senior, of an elder in our community that we look up to and say, there's a visionary, there's someone I want to be like. As a young man, I look at that older man or woman and I want to be like them, because they're honourable. They're truly the honourable minister. I think we've sadly lost that, and I think that should be our priority. What we should be trying to bring back.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you had a chat with Damian Costas on your show a few days ago. And I, listening to him, trying to filter out all the swear words, but still.
That's Damian, mate. He's never going to stop swearing. I think Joel Jamal said, you can come on my show,
but you can't swear.
As a consequence, Damian Costas has not appeared on Joel Jamal's show.
Exactly. Well,
and they're friends.
The thing is, like, being a grassroots, soul to the earth type person myself, if I do say, I can filter out the stuff that is a bit shocking and not leave a nasty comment about his language, because what he was saying, I think, is some of the best commentary and analysis of Australia's cultural history that I've heard for a long time, to be honest with you. And
I happen to have his book here, so that must be fake. But anyway, What Happened to the Lucky Country by Damian Costas is available on Amazon, and I'm not just plugging it because he's a friend, but I do actually think this is quite a book.
Yeah.
There is something in this thesis he's got. I'm not sure I'm totally sold on every last bit of it, but I think there is a decent cultural thesis here, and I think it's worth a read. And I mean, really, he's just simply saying, look, we've heard the Breitbart thing of politics is downstream from culture. If politics is downstream from culture, what's culture downstream from?
May I jump in here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because this is the point where I thought that So everything that he was saying, I thought, yeah, he's on the right track. He's got the fuse lit, and he's going to get to that payoff. As as long as people keep, so he says values is the thing that's upstream from culture. So
Yeah,
values
values
then
and
come
ideas.
down.
Yeah, yeah,
Now, I want to change that and say, no, not values, because values are secondary to actual worldview. So when you look at worldview, it forms the basis of which you then interpret the world through those values. But your values come from your worldview. So if you come from a Christian worldview, let's say, you value human life. You don't
mm,
value human life and then approach a Christian worldview. It goes the other way.
right.
So if we looked at Marxists and we understood that the fundamental principle of Marxism is the abolition of private property, and then we look at the Labor Party and we look at the Greens, and we start to see these things about taxes and other things like that, and transferring power over to the state, and we see this cost of living crisis, and we're thinking to ourselves, are they crazy? Do they not understand? No, they do understand, and they understand very well. They're doing the Marxist thing. And if more people understood, I think, that the Labor Party, in effect, even though some individuals may not be Marxists, if it quacks like a duck, and you look at what the Labor Party are doing, everything that they promised during this election was inflationary. None of it handled any cost of living issues. None of it handled any cost of energy issues. They're pushing things up and up and up. They're just really good at, I suppose, critiquing or criticizing other people. That's how they get the magician with his show hand versus the hand that does the magic.
Yeah, I make no mistake. I'm pretty sure we're in for a horrific 3 years. I mean, this is the most left-wing Labor government since Whitlam,
Mm.
and and
Some
that's
of the
50 years.
some of the righties in the Labor have just recently been kicked out of the cabinet as well in the reshuffle.
Yeah, so it's going even further left. And the problem with this is that the New South Wales right, but also just Labor right in general, was the balancing force that really kept things under control. Now, there are a lot of conservatives saying, let them have it, right? Let's have Sussan Ley or Ley, or whatever her name is. Let's have Little Proud in the National Party. Let's have the Wets run the show and wreck it. Let's have Labor go far left. Let's have everything left. Let's wreck the joint. If you want your revolution, let them at it. Let's do it. Better to rip the Band-Aid off and get it over and done with, because in 3 years, the country's going to be experiencing brownouts, blackouts. People's energy bills are going to be ridiculous. There's going to be mass unemployment. There'll be decent unemployment, not mass unemployment, but there'll be higher levels of unemployment. Inflation will continue to rise, which means interest rates won't be able to come down. The costs of housing will go up. There won't be supply because nobody will be investing because of the suggestion of producing this capital gains tax on unrealized capital gains, which I don't know how people are supposed to pay that. You're going to have to sell assets, so asset prices are going to plummet. Yeah, it's all round going to be bad, right? And there are these people who say, good, good. Let's not meander through this horrible middle ground blah where we just slowly destroy the country. Let's have, a real shock that wakes people up, and then move to a real classical liberal government with real classical liberal free market economics at its core, with real conservative values respected once again, and or center right, at least values respected once again. Certainly, I'd like to see core Christian values respected once again as a Christian. But hopefully maybe that will be the outcome. Maybe this is the demolition before the rebirth that we will see. So I have a lot of friends on the conservative side of politics that are texting me saying, "Hooray, hooray! It's Little Proud and Ley," because if it was Taylor, not about Taylor, but if it was Jacinta Price, and it was Matt Canavan, then we wouldn't see the train wreck we need to see, and we need to see a train wreck within the Liberal Party. And then people saying outside, more broadly, we need to see a train wreck in Australia before the public are going to wake up. Yeah, one thing I think is really worth doing every election, and I try to do it every election, is go and spend at least 2 hours on a polling booth. That is not of your political persuasion, right? Get an area that is the opposite of your political persuasion and go stand at a polling booth in that area, because you actually see the hate. You see I mean, we had a very likable candidate in our electorate, and I was saying, vote for this person. She's a very good person. She's, experienced. She's mum. She's intelligent. She's strong. We need more intelligent people. And people would like nod along, and then they'd say, but I'm never voting for Dutton. So, and then you'd see families of four coming in. It's like, yeah, we're going to vote Green, and they're sort of voting against their own self-interest because they don't understand economics and the impact of these policies, these left-wing ideas. And in Brisbane, we've had mass Green exposure, much worse than the Teals. I mean, we had a Green city council Lord mayoral candidate who was pretty prominent in that election. We have a big city council in Brisbane, so it covers most of the metropolitan city, not like Sydney and Melbourne, where it's just the inner city. It's a big government, one of the biggest in the world, I think, for a local government. But that election, this guy was literally talking about squatting. He was telling people you should go and squat, and he was saying, yes, there's rational. It's rational to shoplift. So the pure Marxism, demolition of property rights stuff, and he still got in West End, which is our sort of Newtown Fitzroy. He got I think 48% of the vote, or something ridiculous. It was like nearly one in two people walked into a polling booth and actually put a one next to this guy's name. It's just mind blowing, even in a left wing area like that. So, I sort of get the feeling that Australians at the grassroots kind of do need to wake up to the political realities a little bit, and are a bit ignorant of economics and civics. And as you point out, that has to do with our education system, because it's not even in there to teach economics and civics. There's absolutely nothing that you read out there from that education manifesto that speaks to anything but a left-wing ideology. See, we can't say that we have a neutral education system. We have a left-wing education system. We have a left-wing ideology dominant in the ranks of the ABC. These are powerful, powerful forces.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and I think, like you bring up Jacinta Price, 2/3 of people responded positively to the anti-voice campaign, which was essentially run by three people. Two of the main ones were Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine. Now, that campaign was so wildly successful, I think that everybody in Australia was ready to vote for the Liberals this time around. So what was in the anti-voice campaign that was so successful that was missing from the Liberal electoral campaign? Because I remember a moment, and I think Liberals were still in the lead in the polls, just barely. And Dutton came on, and he went soft on one of the things. I can't even remember what it was. It was almost a backflip. And I messaged on the
working from home.
Could have been that. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I thought, no, I'm done.
I'm sick of
this. I'm sick of this guy. I had so much hope, but he's lost me. And from that point on, I think it was a precipitous fall in the polls away. So what did we see in the anti-voice campaign that basically we need to recreate somehow?
Okay, I'm going to just put my marketing and PR guy hat on here. Basically, what we saw was a clearly defined product, well delivered, right, with a clear value proposition that was well articulated, and people bought the product. What the product was we don't want racial division in our country. We don't want racial division entrenched in our constitution, and that's a valid, strong statement. And anybody with half a brain that's morally or ethically inclined is going to look at that and go, actually, yeah, that's right. This isn't anti-racist, it's racist. And we can't have that in our constitution. Also, it was going to usher in a lot of dark stuff. It was chapter 9, it was 9, or forgive my ignorance on that, I should know, but it was another whole chapter of the constitution. I don't think people realize that would have set the framework for some pretty horrible property rights stuff to come. So it was very much a Marxist-driven thing. And I think people got that. I think even people who don't understand about politics or Marxism or whatever, I think they sensed it. They knew. that there was something up with this, or something being shoved down our throats here, and I don't like that. So I think the fact that the campaign was good and it was clearly articulated, and of course when I say clearly articulated, then my thoughts go to someone who's doing the clear articulation, and that would be one Senator Price. So I think you can't dismiss the leadership of Jacinta in that, and Warren to a large extent too, that you had two very prominent, respected Aboriginal real problems that we've got. This is only going to satisfy the bureaucrat class of the Aboriginal elite who enjoy the gravy train that comes with victim politics and the $40 billion that's attached to that. So Aussies smelled a rat. They were right. It was right. The position was right, and it was articulated really well. And that's what was missing from this campaign. So I used the analogy on the other side last week that sort of flew a bit but failed a bit, you've got two parties in the Liberal Party essentially at the moment. And this is the problem with the Liberal Party and why I'm questioning whether it can continue in its current form. I certainly don't think it can. It can continue, but it has to pick a team. It can't continue to be both things. It can't continue to be it's not a broad church. It's not the same church, right? It's two separate churches now. And there's the inner city people who I described as the kombucha drink. You're trying to market this kombucha drink to a kombucha audience. And then you've got the chocolate milk guys, which is the outer suburbs, regional and rural Australia, more rugged core values, more traditional values. And so you've got two incompatible products, right? They're both beverages, but when you pour them in the same glass, you get a soup, a drink that is undrinkable and unmarketable and unsellable. And that's what happened. It's not rocket science. I mean, it's pretty simple. Peter Dutton was doing the chocolate milk messaging right through to December. His ratings were going like that because this is the unspoken market, the quiet Australians that are being ignored. All men over 40, non-university educated women over 40, and conservative young people. That's the market that wasn't being spoken to, and it's a big market. So when he started talking to it, he started to go like that. You're going to lose your kombucha seats, right? With that messaging. You aren't going to get the kombucha seats. They're going to go teal, or they're going to go green, or they're going to go Labor. But you don't need them to win government. Now, the problem is that here's the real issue for the Liberal Party. The kombucha seat people are the people who work in communications, politics, media, right? So they drive our discourse. They drive our agenda. It's one of the reasons I can't I couldn't get a job as a conservative commentator, even on Sky News. Probably I'm too sort of single-minded, not talented enough, I suppose, for Sky News. But I could be a reporter again as a reporter in mainstream ABC and Channel 10 and 3AW and all of that. So I mean, but the doors aren't opening to me to join those organisations again. So I think it's because that kombucha group, have got control, right, of the discourse. So what happened in January was we had this wave of kombucha people in the party saying to Peter Dutton, "Nah, you got to slow it down." And my understanding was there was Dutton's office, and then there was the campaign officers, their state base. So you got a complexity there because you got 6 of them, and then you got the federal one. And so there's this tussle going on where Dutton's saying, "Oh, everything come through us," and headquarters are saying, "No, it's got to come through us." And so things are getting signed off quickly in a timely manner. So candidates are all sort of like, "I want to post this on social media," and they're waiting 4 days to get a yes or a no on that. By the time they get the yes or no, the issue's dead, it's passed, their opportunity's lost. People are coming up with great little campaigning ideas and putting them through, and they're getting knocked on the head because headquarters says no. Headquarters says no. It's like that was a real thing that frustrates even the kombucha people in their seats. But yeah, so we just had this rise of the inner city tealish liberals saying, "I need to win this teal seat back," or I need to get this green seat back. And we're not going to do that if Peter Dutton's out there with his chocolate milk messaging. And so we need to water that down. And Dutton, for some reason, I don't know why, thought, and they probably sold it to him as, "Look, mate, you're doing well. You've got a big gap now. It looks like we're on track for victory. Whack in a few teal messages. You'll be cool, right? Just pull back on the working from home thing, don't talk about nuclear. Just ride the bit of teal, bring in a bit of teal stuff now. And he probably thought, it's probably not a bad idea. I've got a bit of it's going all right. Let's do a bit of that. We'll balance it out. We'll play it safe. We'll do the small target strategy that the LNP in Queensland did, and they won the state election. Right? No one thought they would, and they won. So you can't blame them for thinking this might work again, right? And so he does that, and it doesn't work because you're putting chocolate milk and kombucha in the same glass and saying, buy this, it's delicious, and it's disgusting. So it failed. And again, people will buy a party or a product if they'll accept a political candidate who they don't fully agree with, if they believe that candidate is being honest and truthful. That this is neuroscience, by the way. There's research into this on a neuroscience level that shows that people will back a candidate they don't fully agree with if they get the sense that they're being honest and true and real and authentic. But they will not support a candidate that don't know what they stand on things.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if people are involved in watching social media and they're involved in the conversations that happen there, as long as they can keep from being one-eyed, you can feel all these things. Like, people are their own good study of what everybody else might be feeling, if you know what I mean. So when I started getting upset about Dutton backing off and becoming a flip-flopper, I know that all the people that are like me are going to feel exactly the same way. And sure enough, when I went on social media and I saw what people were saying, I thought to myself, oh, he's lost it. He's bloody lost it. And I was just so devastated because I knew that Australia was ready to vote Liberal, but Liberal was not ready to be in government.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the this dilemma within the party of these two distinct, completely incompatible products, with two distinct, incompatible markets, it's not going to go away until they decide, okay, we're going to split. Now, the most sensible way to split it would be to split into the Liberals and Nationals again, which in Queensland involves a bit of admin because they united officially as one party now. They're the LNP. But everywhere else in the country, there's still two parties, right? So you take the coalition and you go back to the traditional split of a Conservative National Party and a more city-oriented Liberal Party. But you'd have to go a step further. You would have to run candidates against each other in every seat.
Yeah, you'd also have to split the funding.
Right. You're going to have to split the funding. But there's a commitment to work in coalition in government and a commitment to, and I think the public would accept that if we were honest and upfront about it. And we just said, look, we have different views on things. You vote, right? Then we'll have however many members in Parliament we're going to have based on your votes. And then we'll work it out. Once we're in government, we'll work out how we're going to compromise on issues. And there'll have to be some compromise, but that'll be handled once we're in government. But at least then you're going to the people with an honest proposition.
Yeah.
Peter Dutton's not out there trying to be all things to all people and being nobody to nothing with a Frankenstein message.
And totally forgetting how to smile. Have you noticed?
Yeah.
Never smiles on TV.
Okay, so which brings me to the second part of it. That's the marketing theory. Now, the PR theory would say also, on the PR side of it, I would be saying you can dress some Frankensteins up. You can kind of make some Frankensteins less Frankenstein-y. And I'm not talking about spinning or BSing anyone. I'm actually talking about genuinely making things more palatable. Like you can say, well, look, we need a bit of coal, or we're going to have blackouts and brownouts, and we're not going to have energy that's cost effective, and that's going to put the price of everything up. It's going to drive up inflation. I don't want to see that. And that's going to mean interest rates can't come down. I don't want to see that. And that's going to mean, people are not going to be able to get into houses, and I don't want to see that. It's going to worsen our housing problem. You can tell a story. You can say on issues where there is a compromise to be drawn, and you can talk that talk, and people will actually go, okay, yeah, maybe we need to keep the coal going a little longer. Maybe shutting off coal in Australia isn't going to help global net zero global warming terribly much, because it isn't, right? But we're moving in the right direction, the right direction for those who believe in the renewables thing. Okay, so we need to move in that direction. Okay, we're doing renewables. We're not upsetting Turnbull Renewables Corporation, Inc., or the Turnbulls or anybody, and we're not upsetting the Simon Holmes Accords, they're good friends, and the Climate 200 group and the Teal voters and all that, keeping everybody happy. Yes, we're marching on with the global world of capital that's just forgot for some reason, just decided wind and solar are everything, and that's where it's all heading. So we're not going to disturb your wealth creation, folks. So you do that, and then you add add nuclear to the mix, and you say, look, there are other technologies which we should be exploring, which the Greens are backing in every country pretty much except Australia. So why aren't the Australian Greens backing nuclear? And you just go with that. You just say that's our plan. Our plan is to let the free market and let investors decide which we're going to get the regulation out of the way, so nuclear becomes an option. Okay, some analysts are saying it's too costly. CSIRO report says it's too costly. Let the investment community determine that, right? If it's too costly, it won't happen, right? The investors won't come. If investors want to take a punt, good on them. Let's have them in the game and in the mix.
Well, that's why Labor's idea of increasing real wages is just killing our economy, because the input costs for things that we produce, we can't produce things cheaper than anybody else. And if you think of natural resources like gold or uranium or coal, things we have in abundance in Australia, if you think of that as a piggy bank, and you just smash open the piggy bank and you just spend all that money, rather than using what we have in the piggy bank to then produce a production society, because we just dismantled all of our production. We sent all our refineries offshore. This is around 2010, when our dollar was at $1.10 American back in 2012. We decided, instead of selling bonds, what we're going to do is print tons of money, which is inflationary. And now we're feeling the inflationary pressure now. The Liberals have more than a political problem, because once they deal with the political problem, then they've got to deal with the economic problem, because what we've been left with from years of socialist ideas is a steaming mess.
Yeah, and there is a connect. I mean, there's obviously a connection between solving the political problem, solving as Damian Costas would say, culture and then values and ideas. We have got to get back to the values and ideas of a society and a country that rewards merit and effort and risk taking.
Because at the moment,
people want to take a risk.
Sorry, at the moment,
we punish it.
All the jobs are in the healthcare sector, the public service sector. And so I'm sitting in my suburb, and we have an NDIS place, we have a Centrelink place, and we've got all these job, organizations to help people get a job and all these other stuff. So we've got tons of people who are basically usually Labor voters who love their life, who all come out at 10 o'clock for smoko breaks down at the coffee place that I'm sitting at. They're all happy as Larry with their little badges. And I'm just thinking, do you realize the pleasure and the satisfaction of actually producing something? So you've got, the tradies coming up and down the main drag with their utes, people that are working with their hands every day. And then you've got the people that sit in comfy chairs with nice computers buying $20,000 desks that they then chuck on hard rubbish. And the NDI, there's just so much misuse of money. There is so much money in the system that I do not know if, even if the Liberals could get in, that they would be able to solve quickly in a way that was felt the economic problems that we've got with the housing market, the energy market, but also the just the shafting of the commodity, the lack of commodity royalties that come back to Australia.
Yeah, look, I think we've got some issues there, and I'm not an expert on the commodity stuff, but my understanding is that it's not. Mining companies are going elsewhere to develop new mines because they don't see Australia as a safe bet, basically. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should suddenly just say, well, you can come and mine here for free and, take your risks here and we won't charge you that many royalties. And, no, I think we've got to sort of say, you're going to have to pay royalties because, you're taking the resources of this nation, and we need to put that in a sovereign wealth fund and invest it wisely ourselves in other things, so that we have some control over them. If they're not going to be manufacturing here, let's at least have some control over the companies that are manufacturing elsewhere for us by owning them
I
and
think
having a significant shareholding in them under a sovereign wealth fund or something like that.
I think they're
so that
after
we've got some damn
stability.
influence. But
If you can get stability in the laws, a business can come down, a mining business can come down to one number. And when a mining business can come down to one number and know that that's going to be their costs, and the government aren't just going to willy-nilly decide to kick them in the groin when they need a little bit of extra money by putting in a big tax, you get business to come. But the legal landscape is so chopping and changing. It's like a stormy sea rather than a mountain range. At least with a mountain range, okay, we've got this big mountain to climb. But once you get to the top, you're like, oh, that's over. Whereas in a sea, the next wave comes and the next wave comes.
Yeah, I mean, they say, look, we're going to develop this mine in Mongolia, right? Because we get more out of it than we're going to get if we build it in Australia. The sovereign risk is what the investors call a government risk, right? Sovereign risk is probably pretty high in Mongolia, but it's manageable. In Australia, they're looking at sovereign risk going, this landscape, this political landscape is a mess, and it could change like that. And the country seems to be moving very left wing, and they want to impose more royalties, even if they're not imposing them yet, they probably will. So our number, we got to do a 20-year projection on our spreadsheet to work out whether we should build this mine or not. And I can't work it out because
who knows
I don't know
what's
what number
going
to
happen
put in
the
for sovereign risk, and so it becomes untenable. So yeah, I mean, I think we've got those issues on the economic front. I think you're right, stability is the key, but I do think a strong leader and a strong Liberal Party government or a strong Conservative government that says, okay, we have a big mandate, we've got a big majority, we just want a big election because we're the new, Reform Australia. We're open for business. Here's the plan. We'll sign contracts for 20 years that future governments won't be able to, renege on. And attract the right sort of, but yeah, there's going to be royalties, right? You've got to pay your royalties to Australia because we've got some economic issues. We need to get a debt to pay down. We've got young people to get housing for. And we need that. So that's the deal. And then start doing some real deals. But we're going around in a circle, right? Because it comes back to you need people with brains and talent and skill, and we're not getting them in our political class because we've got career politicians. So I think the more I think about it, and as I speak to you today, I'm starting to think this is really becoming the main issue. We need to limit those terms. We need to change the very nature of the people that are in our political ranks and have the power, get them back to representing us. And I think the only way to do that is to just make politics an even less attractive career than it is, so that we only get people who really want to serve, but make it attractive from a service perspective of honour. It's an honourable thing to be an Australian politician again. And when we bring back that honour and we bring back the meritocracy and the hierarchy and the respect, we'll get the people. It's a catch-22, right? I guess, but we will get the people who are honourable and who do want to do the right thing for the party. But I think we just need one of those guys to crack the nut. Like, we just need somebody to come in who's got their heart in the right place, that's smart, that doesn't want to be there forever, that demonstrates and leads the way and says, this is what it should look like. This is what a good woman or a good man in politics looks like. And yeah, we don't have that, sadly, at the moment. So we're in the deconstruction stage again. And the election of Sussan Ley and David Littleproud means that and Anthony Albanese and Jim Chalmers means that we're going to see that deconstruction continue for a while.
Yeah. Damian, if you had have told me that this conversation was going to go to the places that we ended up going, I would have thought you're crazy. But
that was a great chat.
Yeah, no, it was really good. I think that people need to have more chats like this with their loved ones. I was encouraging people during the campaigning to go and physically start conversations with your family members that typically vote Green or Labor, because people who are lonely tend to be more susceptible to promises and promises that alleviate pain. And I noticed that free word kept coming up in what Labor and and the Greens were saying. And that word, in a political sense, is just it just drives me bananas. That word free, but yet I think a lot of people who are hurting gravitated to that. But look, we're running out of time, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'm really thankful for the conversation that we've had. I think it was really good, and like I said, I really appreciate the other side, and I think I really want people to support by watching, by commenting, and by liking on their various platforms. And I really want people to feel like they can handle it, to check out Damian Costas' book, because I would totally plug it. I think it's great. We need more people in Australia writing books for Australians about the issues that we've got in our country.
Yeah.
And I also think that Australians need to, ironically, because this is going to be on social media, need to step back from the crack supply of social media, and start to make efforts to talk to their family members, so that we can maybe do our individual part, rather than trying to get government to do everything for us. But we're starting to rebuild our community, not looking to government and state government and local councils to do that for us. We need to do it ourselves.
Yeah, I think I'd hate to see social media go in the direction of mainstream media news, of the, the 7-second soundbite and the endless, short dopamine hits. We have to stop the scrolling feeds and the shorts and the Insta reels and the and the TikToks, and we need to stick with the long form if we want to get some real depth. So we're trying to do that with the other side. We have to do the shorts and everything to get people across and keep our presence out there. But I'm trying to work out ways to strike that balance constantly with the other side, so that we're appealing and we're getting an audience. So we're not just speaking to ourselves, I guess, but also so that we're having meaningful conversations that have a little bit of depth. But it does require our engagement on the audience side. And I find myself scrolling, because this stuff is addictive. It's designed to make you keep scrolling, like a poker machine is designed to keep you playing pokies. They're getting into the neurology and the neuroscience of this scrolling stuff, and the dopamine and the other, chemicals and hormones and whatever that encourage us to keep looking for that hit. And you can feel it as you're scrolling through. I'm not getting the kick yet. I haven't got the aha moment, as Oprah Winfrey would say. But it's better to listen to longer form stuff and get that aha moment that's more genuine and deeper. So stepping out of that cycle, going back to your traditional YouTube feed, and looking at the commentators that are having these sorts of conversations that are a bit more interesting and in depth, and supporting them properly, just by subscribing, clicking subscribe, sending $5, whatever you need to do to help the Looking Glass or the other side or whatever, to continue. And also, also for I think one of the most powerful and wonderful things about social media is what it's doing for Christianity. Because it's bringing intelligent discourse. It's knocking the atheism thing on its head, and it's saying, look, this theory of atheism isn't as rational as it somehow appeared, and that actually humans have never lived without some sort of concept of, a concept of heaven, or a concept of the world being, somehow fallen place, or all these myths and metaphors. And not, when I say myths, I mean in the pure sense, not that they're false, but that it's mythology of truth. And this stuff is important, to human life, and our society has drifted away from it. And I think that's really speaking to the core problems and the values that we do have to get back to that. And Christianity is not it's not a religion to be dismissed. It's for those of us who are Christian, obviously it's the religion. But I would argue, as a Christian, that it is the religion, and that it has concepts and ideas in it that transcend any other religion on the planet. And that we need to kind of get back to that for Western civilization and its roots and its values as well. And even if you just start doing that from an intellectual perspective initially, rather than just accepting the idea that it's intellectually some sort of intellectual void and only stupid people are religious, go back to a time and philosophy where lots of very smart people were exploring these ideas. And why were they exploring them, and what were they looking at? What truths can we take into life from those ideas? And then maybe you might then extend that into a form of more religious belief.
Mm.
And I think social media is enabling that for a lot of people. It's certainly helped me in that way.
Yeah. Well, social media, and forgive the pun, but social media allows for the other side to have its say.
Yeah. And yeah, Catholic school didn't do it for me. It was Catholic school made me want to run away from
Yeah.
organized
Well,
religion.
same.
Right?
I was Christian Brothers. I was Christian Brothers disciplined. So,
Oh, I hear you. Yeah. Me too. I did end up going to a state school in the end, but yeah, it was not a great. I mean, look, it's not as bad as it's been demonized. I mean, there's a lot of, they've taken the minority of very bad things that happened and blowing that out of proportion to satisfy the narratives of the left. The church has done phenomenal good over the years and decades and everything. And, I think there's still a lot in Catholicism that's very, very positive.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just about getting back to the biblical truths and looking at, looking at that stuff and not just throwing it out the window and saying, well,
Yeah.
because it's the ethical foundation of our whole civilization. So to just go, well, I'm going to ignore, 2,000 years of smart people's thinking, just because some modern smart people say it's silly, is in itself silly. And I think people are starting to wake up to the silliness of that.
Absolutely.
That's a great thing.
And the good thing about the liberal ideas and values and worldview, the principles that make for freedom, these have been tried and tested, debated, they've been challenged, they've succeeded in in arguing down or refuting those challenges, and they're accessible. They're accessible through literature like the Lord of the Rings trilogies, the Narnia trilogies by C.S. Lewis. If you want to go academic, you can go Frederick Bastiat, you can go John Locke, you can go back further if you want to Aquinas or Augustine. But they are accessible and they are important to read because they form a basis from which you develop that worldview, which then influences how you see and interpret the world and how you then react to it when something happens. So if we can grasp that liberal worldview and we can really help people to develop, to regain that moral foundation, help people feel less anxious, perhaps then, despite what's going on in the leadership, the average person on the street can have a better experience because more people are caring about people they wouldn't normally talk to.
Absolutely. And maybe our Augustinian Pope will be helpful in this regard. I'm optimistic.
I heard your you seem to be a bit skeptical.
Well, I think I mean he is a protege of Francis to a certain extent. And Francis is a Jesuit and was a Jesuit, and Jesuits tend to be of a left ideological persuasion. And maybe the church needed a bit of that after we thought for a while that it was locked into conservatism there, that was never going to shift. And I think a lot of progressives were worried about that. And so maybe it's, I don't know, the Holy Spirit, whatever's working there and in balancing things out a bit. But it seems like this guy, I mean, we've only had people who aren't Catholic. I mean, you've got diocesan priests and then you have the orders like Jesuits and Augustinians. I think Francis was the first order priest to become pope, right? It wasn't diocesan, just a regular priest, suburban priest sort of. So now we've got an Augustinian, which is interesting. So maybe that's the balancing force we need. It seems subsequent to the initial interpretation of him as being fairly progressive, it seems that he's making it clear that he's still the Pope is Catholic again.
But also taking on the name Leo. Leo has traditionally been associated with being a reformer, a return to more fundamental Catholic beliefs. So I'm hopeful, but at the same time, I'm not a Catholic, but I am really interested and I care about the Catholic Church because, like you could probably empathize, it formed a lot of my upbringing and I had a lot of exposure to Catholic thinking.
It also remains the largest, I guess, denomination of the Christian community, and therefore it sets the tone, right? I mean, look at what's happened to the Anglicans. Imagine if that was Rome. The whole of Christendom would be affected by that, right?
Yeah.
So, we sort of need to worry a bit about the Pope, even if we're not Catholic, because it does have such a huge impact. And I say that even if you're not Christian, because it's the cornerstone religion of Western civilization. So where the church goes, other things follow. But yeah, I think he's that the choosing of the name Leo and the appearance in the traditional majestic garb when he came out, the symbolic conservative sort of it's conservative, but it's just the church normal sort of
like he
garb
didn't come out wearing a hoodie. That's probably, even though that's very Franciscan or Augustinian.
Yeah, that's right. Come out dressed like a monk. Yeah. Anyway, interesting times ahead. We shall see.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again for chatting with us, and good luck with the other side. And I'm really hoping that that you guys get the viewership that you deserve.
And likewise, Josh. Take care.
Thanks, mate.
We'll get you on the other side soon too.
Lovely. See you, mate.